Strasbourg, 1518. A woman steps into the street and begins to dance. She cannot stop. Within days, hundreds join her, twirling, convulsing, collapsing. Some dance until their hearts give out. This is no festival. This is a plague. And its cause remains one of history's most terrifying mysteries. It started quietly. Frau Trophea, a ordinary woman, swaying alone in the July heat. But her movements grew frantic, unstoppable. Soon, dozens mirrored her, then hundreds. The city's cobblestones thrummed with the rhythm of desperate feet. Physicians called it choreomania. The dancers called it torment. Strasbourg was already a city on the edge. Famine had gnawed at its people. Syphilis crept through its alleys. The church preached damnation. And now, this. Some blamed demons. Others saw God's wrath. The authorities, desperate, did the unthinkable. They hired musicians. Let them dance it out, they said. But the music only fed the frenzy. Imagine it. The gasps of the crowd, the stench of sweat and blood, dancers begging for mercy as their bodies betrayed them. Modern science points to mass hysteria, a mind virus of fear, or perhaps ergot poisoning, turning bread into poison. Yet, no theory fully explains why or how. It simply ended. By September, the streets fell silent. The survivors limped home. No cure was found, no justice served, just whispers. Was it madness, a curse, or something deeper, a warning from history about the price of despair? Prague, 1618. A meeting turns violent. Two governors fly out a window, 3 stories down, and thus begins Europe's bloodiest war. This is history's most infamous case of workplace dissatisfaction. The word is defenestration, the art of window-based conflict resolution. That summer, Protestant nobles had reached their limit. The Catholic Habsburgs had shuttered their churches. So they did what any oppressed group might do. They scheduled a very abrupt exit interview. Picture Prague Castle. The governors Wilhelm Slavata and Jaroslav Bojita cornered, the window open, the crowd furious. The landing, a fragrant pile of horse manure, 3 heartbeats of free fall ditto, then impact, and against all odds, survival. The Protestants called it divine intervention. The Habsburgs called it treason. But here's what history whispers. Those governors knew. They'd brought cushions. Was this a botched assassination or brilliant propaganda? Either way, it worked too well, igniting the 30 Years' War. 8 million dead. Entire regions depopulated, all because 2 men took the quickest exit in political history. Today, Prague reenacts it with laughing crowds and straw dummies. But in 1618, that manure pile held the fate of nations. So remember, next time you're frustrated at work, maybe just resign, unless you're prepared to start a continental war. 1932. Australia declared war. The enemy? 20,000 emus. The result? The most embarrassing military defeat in history. Tonight's bedtime story: how birds outsmarted machine guns. Picture Western Australia after the Great War. Soldier settlers, promised fertile land, found a different enemy. 6-foot-tall, razor-clawed emus, crops destroyed, fences flattened. The farmer's cry reached Parliament, And so, with perfect Commonwealth seriousness, the government deployed 2 soldiers, 3 machine guns, and 10,000 bullets to solve the emu problem. The birds didn't read the script. They split into guerrilla units, darting at 30 miles per hour. Bullets sparked harmlessly off the outback dust. Guns jammed. Soldiers sweated. After a month, the tally? 300 emus down, millions of bullets wasted. The Australian army retreated in disgrace. One farmer sighed. If we'd drafted the emus, we'd have won the Great War by Christmas. Today, the victors still patrol the outback, feathered generals of the scrublands. The military, they never spoke of it again. So as you drift off, remember, nature always bats last, and sometimes it uses emus as its weapon. Imagine a courtroom where the accused is a rotting corpse, a trial conducted not for justice, but for vengeance. In the year 897 CE, a pope dug up his predecessor, dressed him in papal robes, and put him on trial. The defendant couldn't speak. He couldn't defend himself. He was already dead. This is the Cadaver Synod, a tale of power, guilt, and a spectacle so macabre it rewrote the rules of divine authority. Rome, 897 CE. The stench of decay lingered in the air as Pope Stephen VI ordered the exhumation of Pope Formosus, a man who had died 9 months prior. Formosus, once a revered leader, had been accused of heresy and ambition, crimes against the church. But Stephen's motives ran deeper. Formosus had crowned a rival king, defying Stephen's allies, and so Stephen staged a trial to erase his enemy, even in death. The corpse was propped onto a throne, its skeletal hands clutching a scepter. A deacon stood beside it, appointed to speak for the deceased. Witnesses testified to Formosus' crimes, violating canon law, coveting the papacy. The verdict? Guilty. Stephen stripped the cadaver of its sacred vestments, severed the fingers that had blessed thousands, and dumped the body into the Tiber River, a final humiliation. Stephen's victory was short-lived. The people of Rome revolted, horrified by the desecration. Stephen was imprisoned, strangled, and tossed into the same river as Formosus. The church, desperate to heal, reinstated Formosus's legacy, but the synod left a scar. It asked a haunting question. Who holds power over life, death, and memory? A pope who judged a corpse, or a corpse that outlasted its judge? History is full of rulers who rewrite stories to suit their reigns, but the Cadaver Synod transcends politics. It's a meditation on mortality itself. What does it mean to judge the dead? Can we ever escape the echoes of our actions? As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger, a reminder that even in silence, the past whispers. Imagine a sound so loud it shattered eardrums 3,000 miles away. A noise like 1,000 cannons firing at once, ripping across oceans and continents. On August 27, 1883, the Indonesian island of Krakatoa exploded with a force 13,000 times greater than the Hiroshima bomb. The blast was heard in Sri Lanka, Madagascar, even Australia, a sonic apocalypse that rewrote the map and painted the sky with fire. This is the day the earth streamed. For centuries, Krakatoa loomed in the Sunda Strait, a volcanic time bomb. By 1883, It had been dormant for over 200 years. But in May, it awoke. Ash plumes choked the sky. By August, the island trembled. On the 27th, at 10:02 a.m., the volcano erupted, not once, but in a series of cataclysmic explosions. The final blast tore the island apart. The sound was beyond comprehension. Sailors in the Strait of Sunda described it as the roar of heavy artillery. In Mauritius, 2,800 miles away, it was mistaken for distant thunder. The pressure wave circled the globe 3 times. Tsunamis, some 120 feet tall, obliterated coastal villages, killing over 36,000 people. Ships were found miles inland, their crews' bones scattered like driftwood. And then came the ash, a veil of sulfur that blotted out the sun, plunging the world into twilight. For months, the planet mourned. Sunsets blazed crimson and gold as ash filtered sunlight into spectral hues. Artists like William Ashcroft captured the blood skies over London. Temperatures dropped, crops failed. The eruption left a 4-mile-wide caldera where Krakatoa once stood, a watery grave for an island. Yet, from destruction came rebirth. In 1927, a new volcano emerged from the depths, Anak Krakatau, the child of Krakatoa. It rises still, a reminder of nature's cyclical fury. The disaster also reshaped science. It became the first global media event, with telegraph lines spreading news of the catastrophe worldwide, a precursor to our interconnected age. Krakatoa's lesson is humility. We build cities, Chartses, and still the earth shrugs. The eruption didn't care about borders, empires, or human ambition. It was a reset, a roar that echoed, "You are small. You are temporary." Yet, in that terror, there's solace. The same forces that destroy also create. The ash fertilizes soil. The child volcano rises, life persists. As you drift into sleep, let the echoes of Krakatoa remind you, even in chaos, there is balance. Picture the year 1807, Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of France, fresh from conquering Europe, stands in a field near Warsaw. Before him, a battalion of rabbits, fluffy, fearless, and furious, charges. Not with cannons or swords, but with teeth and sheer numbers. This is the day the little corporal faced an army he couldn't outmaneuver. 3,000 bunnies with a vendetta. Fresh from signing the Treaty of Tilsit, Napoleon hosted a grand hunt to celebrate. His officers released domesticated rabbits, plump, pampered creatures, expecting an easy spectacle. But these were no wild hares. Accustomed to humans, they saw Napoleon not as a hunter, but as a server of snacks. As the rabbits swarmed, Napoleon's men laughed until the horde turned aggressive. The emperor, now surrounded, swung his riding crop in vain. The bunnies lunged at his boots, his coat, even his horse. Panicked, Napoleon fled to his carriage, but the rabbits pursued, hopping atop the wheels and peering through the windows. The invincible leader of Europe retreated, defeated by creatures smaller than his boots. The incident was swiftly buried by historians, dismissed as a footnote, yet it lingers as a symbol of life's beautiful absurdity. Even emperors cannot control every variable. The rabbits, unaware that they'd rewritten history, returned to their fields, victorious. Centuries later, the tale resurfaced as a metaphor. Power is fragile, pride is precarious, and nature writes its own rules. Napoleon's defeat by bunnies became a lesson in humility, whispered in military academies and comedy clubs alike. History often celebrates grand battles and sweeping ideals, yet it's the small, surreal moments that remind us of our shared humanity. A man who reshaped continents was undone by creatures he'd never considered a threat. As you drift into sleep, let this story linger. Even in our most earnest plans, life delights in surprises. Sometimes the universe sends not dragons or storms, but bunnies, tiny, relentless, and gloriously indifferent to our empires. Imagine a president's funeral, a solemn farewell to a polarizing leader. Mourners gather, eulogies are spoken, and then chaos erupts, not from political rivals, but from a feathered attendee, a gray parrot named Paul, screeching expletives learned from its owner. This is a story of how Andrew Jackson's final goodbye was crashed by a profane parrot, a creature as stubborn and fiery as the man himself. Andrew Jackson, the 7th U.S. president, was a man of contradictions, a war hero, a slaveholder, and a notorious duelist with a temper as sharp as his wit. His companion, Paul the parrot, mirrored his spirit. Jackson adored the bird, teaching it to mimic his salty vocabulary, a habit he honed during his military campaigns. When Jackson died in 1845, Paul was brought to the funeral at his Tennessee home, the Hermitage. As mourners gathered, the parrot perched silently until a loud noise startled it. Paul erupted, "Damn your eyes! Curse you!" The room froze. The Reverend paused mid-prayer. The parrot, now a whirlwind of wings and wrath, had to be carried out, its final cry echoing, "Damn, damn, damn!" The incident was swiftly buried by historians, but not before becoming whispered folklore, a testament to Jackson's unapologetic personality even in death. Paul's exile from the funeral became legend. Some claim the parrot was gifted to Jackson's cook, where it lived out its days squawking curses at unsuspecting kitchen staff. Others say it was sent to a friend's plantation, its vocabulary expanding with new, creatively vulgar phrases. The tale reveals a softer side of Jackson, a man who found companionship in a creature as unruly as himself. It also underscores history's quirks. Even in moments meant for dignity, life's absurdity bursts through. History often remembers leaders through grand deeds and speeches. Yet it's the small, surreal details, like a swearing parrot, that humanize them. Paul's outburst wasn't just a prank, it was a mirror. Jackson's legacy, like his parrot, defies neat narratives. As you drift into sleep, let this story linger. Even in endings, there's room for surprise. A reminder that life, much like a parrot's vocabulary, refuses to be tamed. Imagine a tidal wave of beer, 1.3 million pints, surging through the streets of London like a golden tsunami. On October 7, 1814, a brewery's pride became a weapon, a colossal vat burst unleashing a flood that crushed homes, drowned a child, and left a city in shock. This is the story of how celebration turned catastrophic, and how the simplest of mistakes can drown a neighborhood in tragedy. St. Giles, London, a poor, tightly packed district shadowed by the towering Moo and Company brewery. Inside, a 22-foot-high iron hoop securing a massive beer vat snapped. The structure, weakened by corrosion, erupted. A wave of porter beer, dark, frothy, and unstoppable, crashed through the brewery walls. The flood swept away everything in its path: timber, bricks, and bodies. A child playing in the street vanished instantly. A wake of destruction followed. Cellars flooded, walls collapsed, and survivors scrambled onto rooftops. The beer tsunami even demolished the Tavistock Arms pub, where a barmaid later recounted, "It came like a living thing, roaring and hungry." By the end, 8 lives were lost, and countless homes lay in ruins. The disaster sparked outrage. How could a brewery, a symbol of industrial progress, become a bringer of death? Investigations blamed the vat's poor maintenance, but the brewery faced no legal consequences. A bitter pill for the working-class victims. Yet, the flood left a legacy. It fueled demands for safer industrial practices and highlighted the vulnerability of urban poor. The site itself became a grim landmark. Locals whispered of beer-soaked soil and phantom odors lingering for years. Today, a plaque commemorates the tragedy, a quiet reminder of the day London drowned in ale. The beer flood is more than a quirky footnote. It's a mirror to the Industrial Revolution's dark underbelly, a time when progress often came at the cost of human lives. The flood's absurdity masks a deeper truth. Even the mundane can become monstrous when systems fail. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. The line between civilization and chaos is as thin as a corroded iron hoop. And sometimes, the things we craft to nourish us can swallow us whole. Imagine a banquet hall dripping with luxury. Golden chandeliers, silk drapes, and the scent of 1,000 roses. But this isn't a celebration. It's a trap. In 218 CE, Emperor Elagabalus, Rome's most infamous ruler, devised a cruel joke. Suffocating his guests under a suffocating avalanche of rose petals, a party that began in splendor ended in terror. This is the story of how beauty became a weapon and excess a death sentence. Elagabalus, a teenage emperor obsessed with opulence and chaos, ruled Rome with theatrical cruelty. His parties were legendary, blending hedonism with sadism. One night, he invited senators and nobles to a feast in a room lined floor to ceiling with rose petals. As guests arrived, the scent was intoxicating until the ceiling began to collapse. Servants released trapdoors, dumping tons of petals onto the crowd. The air thickened, guests gasped, their lungs filling with the cloying sweetness of roses. Some laughed, thinking it a prank, until the petals piled waist-high. Panicked, they clawed for air, but Elagabalus watched, amused. The emperor had turned a symbol of love into an instrument of torture. By dawn, several guests lay dead, buried under the weight of his gift. Word of the massacre spread, but Elagabalus dismissed it as a joke gone too far. His reign spiraled into further madness. He married a Vestal virgin, worshipped a sun god, and declared himself a deity. Yet his cruelty alienated Rome. In 2 CE, he was assassinated, his body tossed into the Tiber River, a grim echo of his victim's fate. Historians debate the rose petal story's accuracy, but it endures as a metaphor, the danger of excess, the rot beneath beauty, and the hubris of those who confuse power with invincibility. Elagabalus's tale is a paradox. Roses symbolize love, yet here they became tools of horror. It's a reminder that even the most beautiful things can be twisted by unchecked power. History often repeats this lesson. Empires rise on grandeur only to choke on their own excess. As you drift into sleep, let this story linger, a petal on the edge of a dream. What fragile line separates beauty from danger? And who holds the power to redraw it? Picture a 10th century monk hunched over a manuscript, illuminating the margins with gold leaf and ink. But instead of saints or dragons, he draws a knight in full armor, lance raised, charging a snail. Why would a warrior of Christendom duel a creature slower than a shadow? This is the mystery of medieval marginalia, where chivalry meets absurdity and history whispers through doodles. Across Europe, in the margins of psalters and prayer books, knights and snails clash in silent combat. The knight, armored and grim, lunges with a sword. The snail, armored in its shell, advances at a glacial pace. Scholars have debated this for centuries. Is it satire, a coded joke, or a metaphor for life's unseen battles? One theory suggests the snail represents sloth, one of the 7 deadly sins. The knight, sworn to fight vice, confronts an enemy that literally moves too slowly to matter. Another idea, the snail symbolizes the inevitability of death. Its spiral shell, a reminder of eternity, mocks the knight's fleeting valor. Or perhaps it was just a doodle, a bored scribe's rebellion against the monotony of copying scripture, turning piety into parody. These illustrations vanished as printing presses replaced hand-copied manuscripts, yet the snail's legacy lingers. Art historians see them as windows into medieval humor, a world where even holiness had room for silliness. The knight versus snail duel became a meme of its time, a shared joke whispered across cloisters. One manuscript, the Gorliston Psalter, shows a knight losing to a snail, his sword broken, his shield in tatters. The message? Pride comes before the fall, even when the enemy is a garden mollusk. History's quirks remind us that humanity thrives on contradiction. We build cathedrals and doodle snails. We write hymns to eternity and laugh at a knight's futile charge. The snail, in its quiet way, wins every time, not through strength, but persistence. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Even in our grandest struggles, life finds humor in the mundane. And sometimes, the smallest foes teach the greatest lessons. Imagine a medieval Europe shrouded in fear, not of dragons or plagues, but of cats. In 1233, Pope Gregory IX issued a papal bull declaring war on felines, branding them servants of Satan. What began as a hunt for heretics spiraled into a massacre of innocents, clawing at the fabric of society. This is the story of how a pope's paranoia triggered a chain reaction that reshaped history, and why the meow of a cat became a whispered curse. The 13th century was a time of fear. heretical groups like the Cathars challenged the church's authority. Desperate to crush dissent, Pope Gregory IX turned to symbolism. In his papal bull Vox in Rama, he condemned cats, particularly black ones, as demonic familiars. The decree declared, when a cat sees a human, its tail flickers like a serpent's tongue. It is the devil's vessel. Monks and mobs alike took up arms. Cats were rounded up, tortured, and burned alive. Markets sold cat pelts as trophies. Even nuns were encouraged to exterminate them. But the Pope's crusade had a cruel twist. By eradicating cats, he removed nature's greatest rat catchers. Rats multiplied unchecked, carrying fleas infected with bubonic plague. By 13, the Black Death swept Europe, killing a third of its population, a grim harvest sown by fear. The irony is staggering. Gregory's war on cats didn't purge heresy. It fueled catastrophe. Survivors blamed the plague on God's wrath, not realizing the church's own policies had paved the way. Cats became scapegoats for human folly, their absence echoing through empty villages. Centuries later, historians would debate the link between the cat massacres and the plague. But the symbolism endured, a reminder that superstition, when weaponized, can unravel the threads of civilization. The cat, once reviled, slowly reclaimed its place as a beloved companion, a silent witness to history's absurdity. Pope Gregory's crusade teaches a haunting lesson. Fear distorts reality. The cats, neither saints nor demons, were simply creatures caught in humanity's shadow. Yet, their story mirrors our own struggles, how easily we demonize the unfamiliar, how recklessly we trade a reason for myth. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Even in darkness, there are no villains, only mirrors. And sometimes, the smallest beings hold the keys to our survival. Imagine a battlefield shrouded in mist where soldiers' greatest enemy wasn't bullets or bayonets, but their own beards. In 16th century Austria, a regiment's pride in their elaborate mustaches, a symbol of valor, turned deadly. When fog rolled in, those same whiskers, twisted by shadows, became the faces of enemy spies. What followed was a tragic case of mistaken identity and a firefight fueled by facial hair. High in the Alps. During the 30 Years' War, Austrian soldiers prided themselves on their meticulously groomed mustaches, curling, waxed, and often as wide as their helmets. One chilly dawn, a patrol stumbled through dense fog, nerves frayed by rumors of enemy infiltrators. Peering through the haze, a sentry spotted a figure, broad-shouldered, with a shadowy mustache that seemed to twitch. He fired. Shots erupted. Men fell. But as the fog lifted, the truth dawned. The enemy was their own comrades. The soldiers' iconic whiskers, distorted by mist and paranoia, had become targets. By sunrise, a dozen men lay dead, victims of vanity and a trick of light. The regiment was horrified. Their cherished symbol of brotherhood had turned lethal. Officers swiftly banned extravagant facial hair, decreeing that a soldier's face must not betray him. Locals whispered of the whisker curse, while historians later debated the event's authenticity. Yet the lesson endured. In war, even the absurd becomes deadly. The mustache, a badge of pride, had masked the humanity of the men who wore it, turning allies into phantoms. The War of the Whiskers is a mirror to the madness of conflict. It asks, what do we mistake for threats when fear clouds our eyes? A mustache, a uniform, a shadow, symbols meant to unify can just as easily divide. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. In the fog of uncertainty, even the familiar can become a stranger. And sometimes the true enemy is the pride we refuse to shave. Imagine a wave of molasses, dark, sticky, and unstoppable, surging through the streets of Boston at 35 miles per hour. On January 15, 1909, a 50-foot tall tank holding 2.3 million gallons of molasses burst, unleashing a tidal wave that ripped buildings from their foundations, drowned horses, and left 21 people dead. This is the story of a disaster so bizarre, it turned a bustling city into a slow-motion nightmare and left a mystery lingering in the air. Why did a sweetener become a weapon? Boston's North End buzzed with the hum of industry. The Purity Distilling Company's molasses tank loomed over Commercial Street, a symbol of Prohibition's looming shadow. The molasses wasn't just for baking. It was destined to be distilled into industrial alcohol. But the tank was a disaster waiting to happen. Locals joked that it leaked so badly. Children would collect the sweet drippings on sticks. Then, on a deceptively warm winter day, the tank exploded. Witnesses described a sound like a machine gun as the rivets blew. A 25-foot wall of molasses surged outward, swallowing everything in its path. Buildings crumbled like cookies. A firehouse was lifted off its foundation. A truck vanished into the muck. Survivors recalled the horror of struggling to breathe as the sticky tide filled their lungs. The flood left a city in shock. Rescue workers waded through waist-deep molasses, their boots sticking with every step. The dead were found days later, suffocated or crushed. The legal battle that followed lasted 6 years. Investigators discovered the tank had been built hastily, with metal too thin to withstand the pressure. Purity Distilling was found liable, sparking reforms in engineering standards. Yet, the flood's legacy lingered. For decades, locals swore they could smell molasses on hot summer days, a phantom sweetness rising from the cobblestones. The disaster became a cautionary tale. Progress, when rushed, can turn sweet into sour. The Great Molasses Flood wasn't just an industrial accident. It was a collision of ambition and negligence, a reminder that even the mundane can turn monstrous. The victims weren't soldiers or adventurers. They were workers, children, and bystanders caught in the crossfire of human error. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. The line between order and chaos is as thin as a faulty steel rivet. And sometimes the things we craft to nourish us can drown us in their wake. In 41 BCE, Cleopatra hosted a banquet for Mark Antony, Rome's most powerful general. The evening was a spectacle of excess: golden plates, roasted peacocks, and wines poured from gem-studded decanters. But Cleopatra sought to outdo even herself. According to legend, She plucked a pearl worth millions in today's currency from her ear, dropped it into a cup of vinegar, and waited. The acid dissolved the gem into a frothy, iridescent drink. With a toast to Antony, she downed it. The message was clear. My wealth is limitless. I can afford to destroy it. The science was simple. Pearls are calcium carbonate, and vinegar's acetic acid dissolves them. But the symbolism was profound. In a world where Rome mocked Egypt's decadence, Cleopatra weaponized luxury itself. Antony was reportedly stunned, but the stunt backfired. Roman senators called her wasteful, a critique that haunted her legacy. Yet Cleopatra's act endured as myth, a testament to her audacity. Historians debate the tale's accuracy, but its resonance is undeniable. Pearls became symbols of fleeting wealth, and vinegar, a humble kitchen staple, was forever tied to imperial arrogance. The story even inspired modern chemistry. Scientists still reference Cleopatra's cocktail when explaining acid-base reactions. Cleopatra's pearl wasn't just jewelry, it was a manifesto. She transformed a static symbol of wealth into a dynamic performance, challenging her audience to see value not in objects, but in the stories we build around them. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. True power isn't in what you own, but in what you're willing to let go, even if it's a fortune dissolved into a single sip. Picture a dimly lit parlor in Kursk, Russia, 1892. Two men sit across a chessboard, a prince and a peasant, locked in a game that spiraled into bloodshed. What began as a battle of wits ended with sabers at dawn. This is the tale of how a single chess move ignited a duel, turning pawns into proxies for pride, class, and vengeance. St. Petersburg, winter. Prince Vladimir Orlov, a bored aristocrat, challenged Ivan Petrov, a sharp-witted commoner, to a chess match. The stakes? Nothing less than honor. Ivan, a self-taught prodigy, had humiliated nobles in cafes with his unorthodox strategies. The game unfolded in the prince's opulent study. By the 47th move, Ivan executed a daring castling maneuver, a defensive tactic seen as cowardly by traditionalists. Enraged, Prince Vladimir accused him of cheating. Ivan retorted, "Your pride, not my strategy, is your undoing." Humiliated, the prince demanded satisfaction. At dawn, they met in a snowy courtyard. Ivan, wielding a saber, struck first, wounding the prince's arm. The duel ended abruptly. Servants intervened, but the damage was done. Ivan fled to Siberia, while the prince nursed his wound and his reputation. The duel became folklore. Newspapers mocked the aristocracy's fragility, while chess circles debated castling's fairness. For a time, the St. Petersburg Chess Society banned the move, deeming it ungentlemanly. Ivan Petrov vanished into exile, rumored to have become a revolutionary. Prince Vladimir abandoned chess, claiming it unfit for civilized men. Yet this story endured, a cautionary tale of how games can mirror society's fractures and how pride turns pawns into pawns. Chess is a mirror of the human mind, calculated, ruthless, beautiful, yet this duel reminds us that even logic has its limits. A game meant to transcend class instead exposed its divides. The prince clung to rules, the peasant rewrote them. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. In every contest, there's a shadow of the world beyond the board. And sometimes, the truest checkmate isn't on the battlefield, but in the choices we make when no one is watching. Imagine a force so immense it flattened 80 million trees across an area the size of Luxembourg in the span of seconds. On June 30th, 1908, a fireball brighter than the sun tore through Siberian skis. It didn't just explode, it reshaped the land. No crater, no debris, just a radial pattern of destruction stretching 50 miles wide. This is the Tunguska event, the largest impact in recorded history, and it came from a visitor humanity never saw coming. Central Siberia, 1908, a remote wilderness of taiga and permafrost. At 17 a.m., a blinding light streaked across the sky, followed by a shock wave felt hundreds of miles away. Eyewitnesses described the ground trembling, windows shattering, and a heat like 1,000 suns. The culprit? Likely a stony asteroid or icy comet, 60 to 190 meters wide, exploding 5 to 10 miles above Earth's surface. The energy released, 10 to 15 megatons of TNT, 1,000 times more powerful than Hiroshima. Trees were uprooted in a radial pattern, their trunks stripped of bark and branches. Yet no crater was found. Only a eerie telegraph forest, where trees stood scorched but upright at the epicenter. For decades, the event defied explanation. Locals spoke of the rock that fell from the sky, while scientists debated everything from antimatter to alien spacecraft. It wasn't until 1927 that Russian mineralogist Leonid Kulik led an expedition, finding no meteorite fragments, only the haunting geometry of destruction. The Tunguska event became a cosmic wake-up call. It revealed Earth's vulnerability to near-Earth objects, a threat we now track with satellites and telescopes. Yet mysteries linger. Was it a comet's icy core vaporizing mid-air? A dense asteroid fragmenting under pressure? Theories even included a natural hydrogen bomb or a black hole passing through the planet. But the most plausible answer is also the most unsettling. A space rock disintegrating in a colossal airburst, its remnants scattered as microscopic dust. Today, tiny glassy spherules found in the soil hint at the extraterrestrial visitor, a ghostly fingerprint. Tunguska is a mirror to our cosmic fragility. It whispers, we are not alone in the universe, and sometimes the sky itself falls. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. The same forces that forged stars and planets still dance at our doorstep, and in the silence of Siberia, the trees grow again, a testament to resilience in the face of the unknowable. Imagine a man in a lawn chair, tethered to 45 weather balloons, soaring 16,000 feet above Los Angeles, directly into the flight path of jets preparing to land at LAX. This isn't a cartoon. It's the true story of Larry Walters, a 33-year-old truck driver who in 1982 turned a backyard stunt into a national spectacle. A tale of dreams, duct tape, and the FAA's most unexpected phone call. San Pedro, California, July 2nd, 1982. Larry Walters, a man with no aviation experience, had a simple goal. I just want to see my neighborhood from the sky. His plan: strap 4 helium-filled weather balloons to a Sears lawn chair, dubbed Inspiration 1. He packed a pellet gun, sandwiches, and a camera. His girlfriend's reaction: "You're going to kill yourself." At 10:30 a.m., Larry's friends cut the anchor rope. The chair shot upward like a homespun spacecraft. He ascended into clouds, frost forming on his jeans as air traffic control scrambled. Pilots radioed in a strange object near Alex. Larry, armed with a pellet gun to pop balloons and descend, accidentally dropped it. For 45 minutes, he drifted, a speck in the sky, humming the Star-Spangled Banner to calm his nerves. Larry eventually popped enough balloons to land in a Long Beach backyard, entangled in power lines. He was arrested, fined $1,500, and became a folk hero. The FAA called it the most stupid and dangerous thing we've ever seen. Talk shows hailed him as the modern-day Icarus. Yet, Larry's stunt sparked something. His flight inspired a 2007 Pixar short, Lifted, and a 2015 musical. He proved that absurdity and ambition could coexist, even if his aircraft was held together by hope and hardware store supplies. Lawn chair. Larry's story is a metaphor for the human spirit, messy, reckless, and beautiful. He didn't conquer the sky, he collided with it. Yet in that chaos, he reminded us that dreams don't need permission. They just need a chair, some balloons, and the courage to let go of the rope. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Sometimes the line between madness and genius is as thin as a weather balloon string, and sometimes the view from above is worth the crash. Imagine a university meeting where the guest of honor is a 200-year-old corpse. At University College, London, the preserved remains of philosopher Jeremy Bentham, dressed in his own clothes, seated in a wooden cabinet and topped with a wax head, still attend faculty gatherings. His real mummified head, however, lies hidden, a relic of a man who demanded to be preserved as an auto icon. This is the story of a thinker who refused to leave even in death. Jeremy Bentham, the 18th century philosopher behind utilitarianism, left explicit instructions in his will: preserve my body as an auto icon. When he died in 1832, friends complied. His corpse was dissected, skeleton reassembled, and dressed in his black suit. But the mummification of his head, a process involving salts and spices, went horribly wrong. The result was a leathery, expressionless visage deemed too unsettling for public display. A wax head replaced it, while his real one was tucked away, a secret too grim for Victorian sensibilities. For decades, Bentham's auto icon resided in a dim corner of UC, but in a twist of dark humor, the university began wheeling him into meetings, listing him as present but not voting, a nod to his belief that education should be accessible to all, even in death. Today, Bentham's auto icon remains a surreal campus fixture. In 20 after ethical debates, UCL removed his mummified head from display, citing respect for his legacy and indigenous communities' concerns about displaying human remains. Yet, his wax-topped figure still rolls into meetings, a silent observer of debates he inspired. Bentham's will also demanded his body be of use to the public. In death, he became a paradox, a symbol of rationality preserved irrationally, a man who sought to dismantle tradition, now enshrined as a macabre mascot. Bentham's auto-icon asks a question: how do we remember those who rejected tradition? His corpse is both a tribute and a warning. A man who sought to quantify happiness, now reduced to a curiosity. Yet his presence lingers, a reminder that even in absurdity, ideas endure. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. The line between reverence and spectacle is as thin as a wax mask, and sometimes the dead have more to say than the living. Imagine a country so small, its army could fit in a classroom. In 18X, Liechtenstein, a nation of 8,000 people, sent 80 soldiers to fight in the Austro-Prussian War. Weeks later, they returned with 81 men, not one casualty, not a single wound. Instead, they brought home a friend, a bewildered Italian soldier who joined them mid-retreat. This is the story of history's most polite invasion and the war that ended with a handshake. The year was 1866. Europe braced for the Austro-Prussian War, a clash of empires. Liechtenstein, neutral but obligated by treaty, dispatched its entire army, 80 men, 2 cannons, and a surgeon. They marched into Italy, ready for glory. But the war moved faster than they did. By the time they arrived, the conflict had ended. On the trek home, the troops stumbled upon an Italian soldier, lost, hungry, and speaking zero German. Instead of hostility, the Liechtensteiners offered bread, wine, and a place in their ranks. The Italian, charmed by their kindness, accepted. Legend says he became the life of the group, teaching card games and singing folk songs. When they reached Vaduz, Liechtenstein's capital, the 81st soldier was celebrated as a hero. The army disbanded days later, their legacy etched not in blood, but in friendship. The Italian's fate is unclear. Some say he settled in Liechtenstein, becoming a baker. Others claim he returned to Italy, regaling villagers with tales of the army that fought with schnapps, not swords. The event became folklore, a symbol of Liechtenstein's pacifism. In 1868, the principality abolished its army entirely, opting for neutrality. Today, the 80-man march is reenacted yearly, ending with a toast to the friend who made 81. War often reduces humanity to numbers, casualties, victories, borders. Yet, Liechtenstein's tale flips the script. It asks, what if conflict could be disarmed by kindness? A tiny nation armed with bread and curiosity turned an enemy into a guest. As you drift into sleep, let this story linger. Even in the machinery of war, there's room for the unexpected, a reminder that empathy can outflank any army. Imagine a chicken running across a Colorado farmyard, headless yet very much alive. In 1940, a plucky rooster named Mike defied biology, surviving 18 months without a head. His story is one of accidental resilience, media frenzy, and a farmer's strange bond with a bird who refused to die. This is the tale of a creature who outlived his own execution and became a symbol of stubborn survival. Fruita, Colorado, September 10th, 1940. Farmer Lloyd Olsen aimed to slaughter a chicken for dinner. He swung his axe, but the blade missed its mark, severing Mike's head diagonally, leaving one ear and part of the brainstem intact. To Olsen's shock, Mike didn't die. He stumbled, then righted himself, and began pecking at grain as if nothing had happened. The jugular vein and carotid artery were untouched, and the remaining brain tissue controlled basic functions. Mike adapted. He preened feathers with his wings, crowed, muted, but persistent, and even attempted to mate. Olsen, intrigued, began feeding Mike milk and water via an eyedropper. Word spread. Locals called him Miracle Mike. By 1946, Mike was touring the country, drawing crowds who paid 25 cents to gawk at the headless wonder. Postcards, cartoons, and even a Time magazine feature cemented his fame. Mike's reign ended abruptly in 1947. During a tour stop, Olsen's caretaker struggled to clear Mike's clogged windpipe, a hazard of his anatomy. Without proper medical tools, Mike choked. His body was buried in an unmarked grave, but his legacy endured. The miracle chicken became folklore. Scientists studied his case, citing the resilience of the avian brainstem. Fruta hosts an annual Mike the Headless Chicken Festival, celebrating his peculiar place in history, a reminder that life sometimes clings to the absurd. Mike's story isn't just about survival. It's a mirror to human fascination with the bizarre, a creature thriving despite its limits. We see ourselves in his struggle, adapting to brokenness, finding purpose in the unexpected. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Resilience isn't about perfection. It's about pecking forward, even in the dark. And sometimes, the most extraordinary lifts begin with a botched axe swing. Imagine a room in ancient Rome, not for feasting, but for purging. A place where elites would vomit to make room for more wine and delicacies. This is the myth of the vomitorium. But what if I told you these puke rooms never existed? The truth is far less grotesque. Vomitoriums were never about excess, they were about escape. Let's unravel how a mistranslation turned architecture into scandal. The term vomitorium comes from the Latin vomere, to spew, but not in the way you think. Roman architects used it to describe curved exits in amphitheaters designed to spew forth crowds quickly. Picture the Colosseum, 50,000 spectators funneling through arched doorways after a gladiator match. These passageways were the original vomitoriums, efficient, elegant, and utterly practical. The myth began in the 19th century. Writers, confused by the word's root, imagined Romans vomiting during feasts to prolong their indulgence. The idea stuck, fueled by Victorian-era fascination with Rome's decadence. But no archaeological evidence, no drains, no gutters, no texts, supports the puke room legend. The real vomitoriums were feats of engineering, not hedonism. The myth persists because it fits a narrative, Rome as a cesspool of excess. Yet the truth reveals a culture obsessed with order. The same engineers who built aqueducts designed vomitoriums to prevent stampedes. Even in leisure, Rome prioritized control. Today, historians cringe at the misconception. It's a lesson in how language warps history. A word born from crowd control became a symbol of gluttony, all because of a single syllable's misinterpretation. The vomitorium myth is a mirror to our biases. We project our values onto the past, reshaping it into something titillating or scandalous. But history deserves clarity. The next time you hear a fact about Rome's decadence, ask, who told this story and what did they gain by twisting it? As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. The past is not a funhouse mirror. It's a mosaic, fragile, precise, and waiting to be seen as it is. Imagine a New York City gripped by cosmic wonder. In 1835, the New York Sun printed headlines that turned science into spectacle. Life discovered on the moon, bat-winged humans, blue unicorns, and temples of sapphire, all glimpsed through a telescope. But there was one problem. None of it was real. This is the story of journalism's first viral hoax, a tale of curiosity, credulity, and the moon's most infamous fake inhabitants. August 25th, 1830, the New York Sun, hungry for readers, published a series of scientific articles by Dr. Andrew Grant, a fictional protege of astronomer John Herschel. The claim? Herschel's new telescope had spotted life on the moon, forests of amethyst, rivers of quicksilver, and creatures like Vespertilio homo, bat-like humanoids with copper-colored hair. The public devoured it. Crowds mobbed newsstands. Scientists debated the discoveries. Even Edgar Allan Poe, who dabbled in fake science himself, called it ingenious. For weeks, the sun's circulation tripled, yet the truth was mundane. Writer Richard Adams Locke had spun a satire of science's overreach, mocking claims of lunar life. But readers, dazzled by the romance of the cosmos, chose belief over skepticism. By September, the hoax unraveled. Competitors exposed Locke's fabrication, but the Sun never retracted it. Instead, it shrugged, "We're just amusing the public." The stunt became a landmark in media history, a blueprint for sensationalism. The moon's inhabitants faded, but the legacy endured. The hoax sparked debates about ethics in journalism and the public's hunger for wonder. It also cemented the Sun's place in tabloid lore, proof that fake news, once airborne, is hard to ground. The Great Moon Hoax mirrors our own age of misinformation. Then as now, stories spread faster than facts. Yet, it also reveals something timeless. Humanity's yearning to believe in marvels. Locke's satire accidentally proved that truth and fiction blur when imagination outpaces reason. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. The line between wonder and deception is as thin as a newspaper's edge, and sometimes the stories we fall for say more about us than the stars. Imagine a war so short you could brew a pot of tea and miss it. On August 27, 1896, the British Empire declared war on Zanzibar. By 9:40 a.m., just 38 minutes later, it was over. This is the story of history's briefest conflict, a clash of empires, a scramble for power, and a sultan who refused to play by the rules, all before breakfast. Zanzibar, the clove-scented island, was a British protectorate, ruled by Sultan Hamad bin Thawani until his sudden death. His cousin, Sultan Khalid bin Bargash, seized the throne, barricading himself in the palace with 2,800 troops. The British, however, had other plans. They demanded Khalid step down by 9 a.m., backing their ultimatum with 3 warships, 150 Marines, and an ultimatum: comply or we fire. Khalid refused. At 9:02 a.m., HMS Philomel opened fire. Shells tore through the palace, reducing it to rubble. Zanzibar's defenders fired back with outdated cannons, but by 9:40 a.m., the palace flag fell. Khalid fled. The British installed their puppet sultan. The war ended before some soldiers had finished loading their rifles. The casualty count: 500 Zanzibaris dead or wounded, 1 British officer lightly injured, a sailor grazed by a splinter. Khalid escaped to German East Africa, evading capture for years. The war entered the history books as a footnote, but its legacy lingers, a stark reminder of colonial arrogance. The British didn't just win, they staged the conflict, using gunboat diplomacy to assert control. Today, the 38-minute war is a symbol of imperial hubris, a nation's sovereignty decided in the time it takes to boil an egg. History's shortest war asks a haunting question. What does it mean to win when the game is rigged? Zanzibar's brief rebellion was doomed before it began. A David versus Goliath tale where Goliath wrote the rules. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Power often wears the mask of efficiency, and sometimes the loudest explosions are followed by the deepest silences. Imagine a czar so obsessed with control that he turned human lives into theater. In Horten, Peter the Great, Russia's reformist emperor, ordered his court to attend a wedding not of nobles, but of dwarfs. The guests, dozens of little people dressed in finery, paraded for the amusement of aristocrats. This wasn't a celebration. It was a lesson in power, humiliation, and the price of defiance. Welcome to history's most twisted royal spectacle. Peter the Great despised the old Russian nobility's laziness and tradition. To break their pride, he staged elaborate reforms, forcing boyars to shave their beards, wear Western clothes, and attend absurd parties. The dwarf wedding was his masterpiece. He gathered dwarfs from across his empire, dressing them in miniature replicas of court attire. The bride and groom were forced to marry, while courtiers mocked their vows. Peter laughed loudest, using the spectacle to mock his enemies. If I can humiliate these innocents, what might I do to you? But the cruelest twist? The wedding feast. Peter ordered the dwarfs to drink vodka until they collapsed, then commanded his nobles to carry them, limp and unconscious, to their beds. It was a warning. No one, not even the vulnerable, is beyond my reach. The courtiers, horrified but silent, complied. To protest was to risk exile, or worse. The dwarfs, treated as props, vanished into obscurity. Yet Peter's stunt backfired. Stories of the wedding spread, fueling resentment against his brutality. Historians debate his motives. Was it pure sadism, a calculated power play, or a warped joke on a society obsessed with hierarchy? Whatever the cause, The event became a symbol of Peter's paradox, a modernizer who dragged Russia into the Enlightenment by medieval cruelty. Peter's dwarf wedding lingers as a mirror to power's darkest corners. It asks, who suffers when rulers play? The event wasn't just about control, it was about erasing empathy. By reducing humans to dolls, Peter forced his court to confront their own complicity. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Even progress can wear a tyrant's mask, and sometimes the most enlightened minds are the ones who forget their humanity. Imagine a medieval village where the clatter of hooves and the toll of church bells set the rhythm of life. But one morning, the Pope himself declared war, not on heretics or kings, but on roosters. Their crime? Crowning the dawn at unholy hours. This is the tale of a papal decree so absurd it turned barnyard birds into enemies of the church and left a village clutching its feathers in fear. Legend claims that in the 13th century, Pope Gregory IX, already infamous for his war on cats, turned his ire toward another creature, the humble rooster. According to myth, the Pope's sleep was shattered by a rooster's pre-dawn crow, which he deemed a disruption of divine taunts. In a fury, he issued a papal bull excommunicating all roosters who dared crow before sunrise. Villagers, terrified of eternal damnation for their chickens' natural instincts, scrambled to comply. Roosters were gagged, coops were boarded up, and farmers prayed for silent mornings. But nature refused to obey. As one chronicler wrote, the birds, unaware of Rome's wrath, sang on, unrepentant, unafraid. The decree collapsed under its own absurdity. Peasants rebelled, arguing that even God made the rooster to crow. Priests quietly ignored the edict, blaming wayward crows on sinful winds. Yet the myth endured, a testament to the medieval mind's dance between piety and superstition. Modern historians debate the tale's authenticity, but its symbolism lingers. A reminder that even the holiest authorities can mistake noise for heresy, and that chickens, like history, refuse to be silenced. The excommunicated roosters invite us to laugh at the past, but also to recognize its reflection in our own time. How often do we condemn the noise we don't understand? The roosters, unaware of their infamy, simply followed their nature. Perhaps the true heresy isn't in their crowing, but in our fear of the uncontrolled, the untamed, the alive. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. The line between order and absurdity is as thin as a rooster's crow at first light. Imagine a city held hostage by its own river. In the summer of 1858, London's Thames became a noxious stew of human waste, rotting meat, and industrial sludge. The stench was so vile, Parliament draped its windows in chloride-soaked curtains and briefly shut down. This is the story of how a city's neglect turned its lifeline into a weapon, and how desperation forged a modern marvel. Victorian London was a city drowning in its own filth. The Thames, once a source of pride, had become an open sewer. Factories dumped chemicals, slaughterhouses tossed carcasses, and homes flushed waste directly into the river. By June 1888, a heat wave baked the sludge into a putrid miasma. The odor infiltrated homes, shops, and even the hallowed halls of Parliament. Members of Parliament stuffed rags in cracks, doused curtains in disinfectant, and debated fleeing the city. The press dubbed it the Great Stink, a crisis so dire legislators feared cholera-carrying vapors would kill them before they could pass reforms. Ironically, the stench was a symptom of a deeper horror. Contaminated water had already killed thousands in cholera outbreaks, but it took the smell, a visceral, unignorable assault, to force action. Engineer Joseph Basil Jett seized the moment. He designed a revolutionary sewer system, a network of underground tunnels to divert waste far from the Thames. Over 100 miles of pipes were laid, including the iconic Victoria and Albert embankments. The project cost $4.2 million, over $500 million today, but saved countless lives. Cholera rates plummeted, and the Thames breathed again. Basil Jett's system, still in use today, became a blueprint for modern cities, a testament to crisis-driven ingenuity. The Great Stink is a paradox, a disaster that birthed progress. It reminds us that change often requires a crisis to cut through complacency. The Thames filth forced London to confront its hubris, and in doing so, built a legacy of resilience. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Even in decay, there's potential for renewal, and sometimes the most offensive odors lead us to the clearest solutions. Imagine a desk drawer holding not letters or quills, but a human heart. In 1802, Mary Shelley, author of Frankenstein, kept her husband's preserved heart in a silk-lined box, tucked beside her manuscripts. This wasn't a Gothic fantasy, it was her reality. How did the woman who birthed science fiction's most iconic monster come to cherish such a macabre relic? This is the story of love, loss, and the weight of memory that outlived the flames. Percy Bysshe Shelley, romantic poet and Mary's husband, drowned in a storm off the coast of Italy. His body washed ashore, identifiable only by a book of Keats's poetry in his pocket. By Tuscan law, suicides and shipwrecked bodies were denied burial. Instead, friends cremated him on a beach pyre. But the fire couldn't consume his heart, a symbol, some say, of his undying passion. Legend claims it was plucked from the ashes, still intact and given to Mary. She wrapped it in silk and kept it close, a morbid muse that traveled with her for decades. Biographers speculate she stored it in a desk drawer alongside drafts of her novels, as if the heart itself fueled her tales of reanimation and grief. Mary's son, Percy Florence, inherited the heart after her death. It was buried with him in 1889, reuniting the Shelleys in a macabre postscript. The heart's journey from pyre to desk to grave mirrors Mary's own life, marked by tragedy, creativity, and an obsession with the boundary between life and death. Historians debate the heart's authenticity. Was it truly Percy's, or a symbolic token Mary crafted to cope? Either way, its legacy endures. It inspired her darkest works, where love and loss collide with science and the supernatural. Mary Shelley's jarred heart is more than a curiosity. It's a testament to how grief defies logic We cling to fragments, bones, letters, memories, to bridge the gap between absence and presence. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Love, like Frankenstein's creature, refuses to stay buried. And sometimes the things we mourn become the seeds of what we create. Imagine a county fair in 1876, America's Centennial Year. Farmers, flappers, and politicians gathered not to celebrate independence, but to crown a champion, chicken, Centennial Chicken. Pageants swept rural America, where poultry weren't just livestock, they were stars. But were these events a patriotic homage to agrarian pride, or a surreal satire of Gilded Age excess? Let's unravel the feathers and folklore. Post-Civil War America was obsessed with progress and poultry. The 18th Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia showcased new farming tech, but rural towns hosted their own spectacle, chicken pageants. Farmers groomed their finest roosters and hens, dressing them in tiny patriotic bows. Judges awarded prizes for most patriotic plumage, loudest crow, and even best impersonation of a bald eagle. Newspapers joked that the events were a revolt against dignity, but crowds adored them. Politicians used the pageants to court rural voters, posing with prize-winning chickens. The New York Times quipped, "Never has a chicken been so flattered, so photographed, or so utterly confused." Yet whispers arose. Were these pageants a dig at the era's obsession with spectacle, or just a whimsical distraction from Reconstruction tensions? The truth, like a chicken's feathers, scattered in the wind. By the 1880s, the pageants faded, replaced by bicycle races and Edison's phonograph, yet their legacy lingered. Poultry breeding became a science, and show chickens evolved into symbols of American ingenuity. Historians debate whether the events were real or a myth spun by satirists. No official records survive, but the Centennial Chicken endures in folk tales, a reminder that history's quirks often strut where facts fear to tread. The Centennial Chicken pageants mirror humanity's dance between absurdity and ambition. They ask, when does pride become parody? Whether real or imagined, these events remind us that history isn't just wars and laws. It's also the stories we invent to make sense of chaos. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Even the humblest creatures can star in legends, and sometimes the line between patriotism and poultry is deliciously blurry. Imagine a man who survived poison, bullets, and a frozen river, only to be remembered as history's most elusive corpse. In December 1916, Gregory Rasputin, the Mad Monk of Russia, was murdered not once but 3 times. Poisoned cakes, revolver shots, and a plunge into the Neva River all failed to kill him quickly. This is the story of a death so stubborn it seemed cursed, and a life so entangled with myth, even murder couldn't silence it. St. Petersburg needed Prince Felix Yusupov lured Rasputin to his palace, determined to end the monk's influence over Tsarina Alexandra. The plan was meticulous: poison-laced wine and cakes. But Rasputin sipped, ate, and laughed, unharmed. Rumors claimed he'd ingested so much toxin in his life, his body was immune. Panicked, Yusupov shot him. Rasputin collapsed, then lunged at the prince, screaming, "You bad boy!" A second shot to the head finally stilled him, or so they thought. Hours later, his corpse was dumped into the Neva. When recovered days later, his lungs held water. He'd briefly revived, struggling in the ice. The autopsy noted no poison, only bullets and drowning. Yet the mystery lingered. Had he truly died by murder or by sheer refusal to die? Rasputin's death became a Rorschach test for Russia's turmoil. Royalists saw divine punishment, revolutionaries, a symbol of aristocratic rot. The Bolsheviks later exhumed his body, burning it to ash, lest his grave become a shrine. Yet the myths flourished. Some claimed his severed penis was preserved. It wasn't. Others swore his eyes glowed in death. The truth? His murder foreshadowed the Romanovs' fall, a desperate act by a crumbling regime, undone by the same chaos Rasputin had embodied. Rasputin's death asks a haunting question. Can a man outlive his legend? His murderers tried to erase him, yet his name outlived the Romanovs, the Tsar, even the Russia he knew. He became a metaphor for the poison of unchecked power and the futility of killing what people refuse to forget. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Some lives are too strange for a single death, and sometimes the hardest thing to kill is a story. Imagine an emperor who ruled with an iron fist and a voice he believed could charm the gods. Emperor Nero, Rome's most infamous tyrant, didn't just crave power, he craved applause. He competed in public singing contests, declaring himself the greatest artist of the age. But there was a catch. No one was allowed to leave until he finished. This is the story of how a megalomaniac turned concerts into captivities, and why Rome trembled at the sound of his voice. Nero's obsession began after the Great Fire of 66 CE, which he blamed on Christians to deflect suspicion. Guilt-ridden and paranoid, he sought solace in art, or so he claimed. He trained relentlessly under vocal coaches, fasting to preserve his voice and lying on his back with lead plates on his throat to strengthen it. By 65 CE, he began entering singing competitions, often rigged in his favor. But the real horror was his insistence on performing in public. Senators, citizens, and even foreign dignitaries were forced to attend. Guards blocked exits. Anyone who left risked execution. Historian Suetonius wrote of a senator who faked a heart attack to escape, only to be dragged back in. Another audience member, desperate to leave, leapt from a balcony. Nero, unfazed, sang louder. His performances could last hours, his voice warbling through epics like the Iliad, while Rome's elite stifled yawns and terror. Nero's delusions reached their peak in 8 CE when he competed in Greece's Olympic Games. He cleared the stadium of all rivals, declared himself the winner, and awarded himself a golden wreath. But Rome had enough. The Senate declared him a public enemy, and Nero fled. His voice, his art, and his tyranny collapsing into dust. His legacy? A cautionary tale of power untethered The Senate ordered his statues destroyed and his name erased. Yet his name endured, synonymous with madness and the toxic marriage of art and authority. Nero's singing contests were more than vanity projects. They were acts of psychological warfare. By forcing Rome to applaud, he blurred the line between emperor and entertainer, tyrant and performer. It wasn't enough to rule. He needed validation, even if it meant holding an empire hostage to his ego. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Power distorts reality, and sometimes the loudest voices are the ones afraid of silence. Imagine a Viking warrior gazing at the night sky, not with fear, but with a smile. To the Norse, the aurora borealis wasn't just celestial fire. It was a litter of sky kittens frolicking in the heavens. These weren't ordinary kittens, though. They were spectrous, playful, and born from the gods' most whimsical magic. How did a culture of fierce raiders come to see the aurora as a celestial delight? This is the story of how Vikings turned a scientific marvel into a myth of mischief, and why the sky still purrs with their legacy. Long before science explained the aurora borealis, Vikings wove tales to make sense of its shimmering ribbons. In the 13th century, Konungs Skuggsins, King's Mirror, a Norse text, the aurora was likened to the gleam of light from the mane of a horse ridden by the Valkyries. But in oral traditions, the lights were playful spirits, often described as kittens chasing each other across the sky by their glowing fur trailing color. The myth emerged from the aurora's unpredictable dance, flickering greens and reds, twisting like living creatures. To farmers, it was a warning of harsh winters. To warriors, it was a blessing from Freya, goddess of love and war, who sent her feline companions to guide lost souls. Some even claimed the sky kittens could be heard mewing, a sound now attributed to geomagnetic activity. But then, a divine whisper. The sky kittens myth faded as Christianity spread, but fragments survived in sagas and folklore. Medieval chroniclers like Snorri Sturluson recorded the aurora as swords of the gods or bridges to Asgard, but the kitten imagery endured in rural tales. Today, scientists see the aurora as charged particles colliding with Earth's atmosphere, yet the Viking lens lingers, a reminder that humanity has always sought wonder in the inexplicable. Their kittens weren't just fantasy. They were a bridge between the tangible and the divine, a way to make the cosmos feel alive. The Viking sky kittens teach us that even the fiercest cultures need poetry. They turned a celestial mystery into a story of playfulness and connection, a contrast to their fearsome reputation. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. The unknown isn't always a threat. Sometimes it's a dance, and in the space between science and myth, we find the stories that make the universe feel like home. Imagine a single tulip bulb worth more than a mansion, a ship, or a chest of gold. In 6th century Holland, tulips became the ultimate status symbol. Petals, painted with flames, traded in frenzied auctions. But this wasn't botany. It was a bubble, a flower so ordinary yet so coveted, it crashed an economy. This is the story of how beauty, scarcity, and human folly turned a garden into a gold mine, and then into ruin. Amsterdam, 1634. The Dutch Golden Age bloomed with wealth from trade and art. But the true obsession? Tulips. Their vivid stripes caused by a virus made them rare. The Semper Augustus, a crimson and white marvel, fetched 10 times the annual salary of a skilled craftsman. Speculators flooded taverns, trading bulbs like stocks. Contracts for future blooms, some not yet planted, sold for fortunes. By 1637, a single bulb could buy 24 tons of wheat, 500 pounds of cheese, or a silver goblet. Then in February, panic struck. A buyer refused to pay an inflated price. The bubble burst. Bulbs worth guilders by morning were worthless by nightfall. Fortunes evaporated. Families were ruined all over a flower. The Dutch called it wind handle, trading in wind. Governments banned tulip contracts, but the damage was done. The crisis exposed the fragility of value itself. A bulb's worth wasn't in its beauty, but in the belief others would pay more. Yet tulips endured. The Semper Augustus faded, but the Dutch replanted. Today, Keukenhof Gardens blooms with 7 million bulbs annually, a living museum of the mania. Economists still cite tulip mania as the first recorded speculative bubble, a warning that obsession can turn petals into poison. Tulip mania mirrors our own age of NFTs and meme stocks. It asks, why do we pour wealth into the ephemeral? The answer lies in the paradox of value. Water sustains life. Diamonds dazzle. Tulips, fleeting and fragile, became symbols of both aspiration and absurdity. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Value is a story we tell ourselves, and sometimes the most irrational blooms grow from the human hunger to believe. Imagine a severed ear pickled in a jar, becoming the spark that ignited a war. In 1739, Britain declared war on Spain, all because a sea captain named Robert Jenkins claimed his ear was sliced off by Spanish guards. But this wasn't just about anatomy. It was about pride, trade, and a continent's hunger for control. This is a story of how a single ear became a rallying cry, and how history's absurdities often hide deeper truths. 731. The Caribbean Sea. Captain Robert Jenkins, a British merchant, was boarded by Spanish guardacostas enforcing trade restrictions. According to Jenkins, they accused him of smuggling, tied him to a mast, and sliced off his ear with a cutlass. He kept the ear, preserved in vinegar, as a gruesome souvenir. For 8 years, tensions simmered. Britain chafed under Spain's restrictions on trade with its colonies. When Jenkins brandished his ear in Parliament in 730, it became a symbol of Spanish arrogance. The public erupted. Revenge for Jenkins's ear became the cry. By October 1739, Britain declared war, a conflict framed as a defense of national honor, but rooted in economic rivalry. The war itself was anticlimactic. Naval skirmishes flared in the Caribbean and Georgia, but neither side gained ground. By 1742, it merged into the War of Austrian Succession, swallowed by larger European politics. Yet the name Jenkins Ear stuck, a testament to how symbols can eclipse substance. The ear became folklore. Historians debate its authenticity. Did Jenkins really lose his ear? Or was it a propaganda tool? The jar itself was never found, and Jenkins's testimony was vague. Yet the war reshaped empires. Spain clung to its colonies, while Britain's failures fueled reforms in its navy. The phrase Jenkins' ear endures as a metaphor for conflicts fueled by performative outrage. It asks, how often do nations cloak greed in symbols of victimhood? A pickled ear became a pretext for power, a lesson in how history's dramas are often scripted by the absurd. The War of Jenkins Ear teaches us that symbols matter. A nation's pride can be wounded by a single preserved organ, just as modern wars are waged over hashtags or slogans. Yet, beneath the absurdity lies a universal truth. Humans need stories to justify chaos. Jenkins' ear wasn't the cause, it was the excuse. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. History's battles are rarely what they seem, and sometimes the smallest relics, a jar, a rumor, a cry, hold the weight of empires. Imagine a king whose face haunted his own courtiers. Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg ruler, was so inbred his family tree collapsed into a single twisted line. His jaw hung slack, his tongue swollen, his mind trapped in a fog. He couldn't chew, couldn't rule, couldn't father an heir. This is the story of a dynasty's hubris, how Spain's throne became a genetic death sentence, and how a royal bloodline crumbled into dust. Born in 1661, Charles II was the product of centuries of Habsburg inbreeding. His parents were uncle and niece. His grandparents included 2 direct siblings. The dynasty feared diluting their pure blood, so they married cousins, aunts, and uncles, whatever kept power within the family. Charles, nicknamed El Hechizado, the Bewitched, suffered grotesquely. His body aged prematurely. He couldn't walk until age 8, speak clearly until 10. Doctors described him as a living corpse. His first marriage to Marie-Louise of Orleans ended in stillbirths. His second, to Maria Anna of Neuburg, produced no heirs. The court whispered he was cursed, but the truth was colder. Biology had rebelled. By Spain's empire teetered. Charles's inability to rule or reproduce sparked the War of Spanish Succession. His death at 38 marked the end of the Habsburg dynasty, a collapse foretold in his deformed features. Charles' body was dissected post-mortem. Physicians noted his organs were riddled with defects, a testament to generations of genetic decay. The Habsburgs' obsession with purity had backfired. Their empire fractured, divided between Bourbon and Habsburg claimants. The war reshaped Europe. France's Louis XIV installed his grandson on Spain's throne, ending Habsburg rule. Charles' legacy became a warning. A crown cannot survive on blood alone. His portrait, with its vacant stare and drooping lip, hangs today in the Prado Museum, a grotesque masterpiece of royal folly. Charles II's story isn't just about genetics. It's about the cost of clinging to power. The Habsburgs thought they could control destiny by sealing their bloodline. Instead, they bred a king who couldn't rule, a nation that couldn't heal, and a dynasty that couldn't endure. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Purity is a myth that poisons from within, and sometimes the most fragile things aren't bodies, but the beliefs that break them. Imagine the most iconic landmark in Paris, sold not once, but twice. In 1920, con artist Victor Lustig posed as a government official, convinced scrap metal dealers the Eiffel Tower was slated for demolition, and pocketed thousands. But the twist? He did it again months later, exploiting the same scam. This is the story of how a man turned the city of light into a playground for darkness, and why the Eiffel Tower's sails still haunt our trust in authority. Paris, 1925. The Eiffel Tower, built for the 1889 World's Fair, was still seen by many as a temporary eyesore. Lustig, a suave Austrian grifter, seized on this. He forged government letterhead, invited scrap metal tycoons to a secret meeting, and spun a tale. The tower was rusting, costly to maintain, and would be sold for scrap. The dealers, flattered by the exclusive offer, fell for it. Lustig staged a phony auction, accepted bribes, and vanished with the cash. When one victim realized the scam, Lustig doubled down. He sold the tower again, this time to a different buyer. By the time authorities caught on, he'd fled to the U.S., leaving Parisians to wonder, how could a symbol of France be sold like scrap? Lustig's audacity became legend. The French press mocked the victims, but the scam exposed a deeper truth. Even landmarks can be weaponized by charm and bureaucracy. Lustig's fake documents were so convincing that some dealers still believed the sale was real. He later inspired the 1960s film The Confidence Man, while the Eiffel Tower, ironically, grew more beloved. Today, it's a symbol of resilience, a monument that outlived both its critics and its con artists. The Eiffel Tower's sails teach us that trust is a fragile currency. Lustig didn't just exploit greed, he exploited the appearance of legitimacy, a forged seal, a confident smith, and a story can unravel even the strongest institutions. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. The line between truth and fiction is as thin as a bureaucrat's signature, and sometimes the grandest symbols are the easiest to counterfeit. Imagine the moment a pharaoh's tomb is sealed not just with gold and relics, but with living servants. In ancient Egypt, the journey to the afterlife wasn't solitary. Pharaohs demanded company: cooks, musicians, scribes, even children. Buried alive, these souls were meant to serve eternally. This is the story of a civilization's obsession with immortality and the human cost hidden beneath its pyramids. During the First Dynasty, around 3000 BCE, pharaohs like Djerer and Ka were buried with dozens of servants. Archaeologists uncovered mass graves near their tombs, skeletons of men, women, and children, their bodies contorted, some clutching tools or musical instruments. Scholars debate their fate. Were they drugged, poisoned, or coerced into sacred duty? The belief was clear. The afterlife mirrored earthly life. Servants were needed to prepare meals, mend linen, and entertain the pharaoh's spirit. But by 2000 BCE, the practice faded. Instead, Egyptians crafted Shabti figurines, tiny clay servants inscribed with spells. These dolls replaced human sacrifices, a shift from bloodshed to symbolism. Yet whispers of the old ways lingered. In 1902, Howard Carter found 2 stillborn girls in Tutankhamun's tomb, possibly buried to accompany him. The line between ritual and cruelty blurred until ethics intervened. The shift to Shabtis marked a quiet revolution, a recognition that human life couldn't be collateral for divinity. Yet the legacy of sacrifice endured. Tomb inscriptions praise servants' loyalty, while modern archaeologists grapple with the ethics of these finds. Today, practice seems barbaric, but it reflects a universal truth. Civilizations build their heavens on earth's terms. The servants' bones, now dust, remind us that immortality is a story we write in flesh and clay. Egypt's buried servants ask a timeless question: who do we sacrifice to preserve power? They weren't villains or martyrs. They were threads in a tapestry of belief. Their lives, extinguished for a pharaoh's eternity, challenge us to see how easily morality bends under the weight of myth. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Even the grandest dreams can cast the darkest shadows. And sometimes the truest relics aren't gold or jewels, but the echoes of those who served in silence. Imagine a fireball brighter than the sun streaking across a winter sky. In 2010, a 60-foot asteroid exploded over Chelyabinsk, Russia, unleashing a shockwave that shattered glass across 6 cities. Windows imploded, storefronts collapsed, and Windhost people were injured, not by flames or debris, but by the razor-sharp fallout of a cosmic punch. This is the story of how a rock from space turned a mundane morning into a symphony of glass, and a lesson in how fragile our world really is. February 15th, 2010, Chelyabinsk, a quiet industrial city in the Ural Mountains. At 9:20 a.m., a meteor traveling 40,000 miles pierced the atmosphere, glowing white-hot. Drivers on icy roads stopped to film the spectacle, a streak of light 30 times brighter than the sun. Then came the blast. The asteroid detonated 14 miles above the ground, releasing energy equal to 100 kilotons of TNT. The shockwave shattered windows, collapsed roofs, and sent glass shards slicing through schools, hospitals, and homes. A teacher described it as a sound like the sky itself cracking. Most injuries were minor, cuts from flying glass, concussions from collapsing walls, but the psychological toll lingered. Residents spoke of terror, of feeling punished by the heavens. The meteor's debris scattered across the region, with fragments recovered from Lake Chebarkul. Scientists marveled. The rock, likely from the asteroid belt, had survived eons to crash into a modern city. Chelyabinsk became a case study in cosmic preparedness. The event exposed how unready humanity was for near-Earth objects. "We dodged a bullet," one astronomer noted. A few degrees difference, and the impact could have leveled the city. Today, global monitoring systems track potential threats, but the scars of 2010 remain, etched in broken glass and collective memory. The Chelyabinsk meteor asks a quiet question. How do we live under a sky we cannot control? It wasn't malice that shattered those windows, it was physics, a reminder that civilization exists at the mercy of forces older than life itself. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Safety is an illusion approached from distance and time, and sometimes the universe sends us a message. In the language of a broken glass, imagine a Parisian kitchen transformed into a battlefield, not with swords, but with sugar and butter. In the 19th century, French pastry chefs settled disputes of honor not through words, but through duels. A stolen recipe, a slighted soufflé, or a plagiarized pastry could spark a showdown. This is the story of how dessert became a matter of life, death, and national pride, and how one duel gave birth to a legendary eclair. Paris, 1832. The city's pastry guilds were as fierce as its revolutionaries. Chefs like François Lefebvre and Gaston Rousseau, masters of the art sucrerie, clashed over a single recipe with the éclair au chocolat. Lefebvre accused Rousseau of stealing his technique for the perfect glaze. Rousseau retaliated by claiming Lefebvre's filling was unworthy of French soil. The duel was set. At dawn, they met in a courtyard, armed not with pistols, but with piping bags and paring knives. Rules were strict. Each chef had 1 hour to create a dessert that would be judged by a panel of pâtissiers. The loser would renounce their claim publicly. Lefebvre's eclair crumbled under pressure. Overbaked, his pastry cracked. Rousseau's cake, a show-stopping gâteau Saint-Honoré, but his glaze dripped, betraying haste. The judges declared it a stalemate, yet in their frustration, the chefs collaborated, merging their recipes into the iconic Éclair Rousseau-Lefebvre, still served today at Le Cordon Bleu. The duel became legend, a cautionary tale for apprentices. Guilds began requiring chefs to sign recipe oaths sworn on a whisk and rolling pin. Newspapers mocked the flour-fueled feud, but the story sparked a renaissance in French pastry. Rousseau and Lefebvre's truce birthed a new era of culinary collaboration. Their hybrid eclair, with its crisp shell and velvety filling, symbolized unity. Yet whispers linger. Did Rousseau truly invent the glaze, or was the duel a ploy to elevate their reputations? The truth, like sugar in a whisk, dissolved into myth. The pastry duels teach us that passion can be both poison and antidote. These chefs, bound by pride and artistry, turned kitchens into coliseums, yet their rivalry also birthed innovation, a reminder that competition, even at its most absurd, can create beauty. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. The sweetest victories often emerge from the messiest conflicts. And sometimes the best recipes are written in the space between enemies. Imagine a knight in shining armor, a symbol of chivalry and strength, brought low by the weight of his own valor. In the Middle Ages, armor could weigh over 100 pounds, a knight's shield against battle, but a death trap in water. Rivers, meant to be crossed, became graves for warriors whose iron shells dragged them under. This is the story of how protection turned perilous, and how even the mightiest knights drowned in their quest to survive. Medieval armor was a marvel of engineering. Layered steel plates, chainmail, and helmets forged to withstand sword and lance. But this armor wasn't designed for swimming. At the 1141 Battle of Lincoln, a knight fleeing across a river drowned when his armor pulled him down. Chroniclers wrote, "His pride in plate became his tomb." By the 14th century, full plate armor averaged 60 to 100 pounds, distributed to allow movement on land. In water, the weight was catastrophic. Knights drowned during sieges, retreats, or even simple crossings. One tale describes a lord who sank mid-river, his squire desperately hacking at his armor to free him, to no avail. The irony, armor was meant to prevent death, yet rivers, moats, and marshes became silent assassins. By the 15th century, knights began adapting, using lighter aquatic armor for campaigns near water or hiring swimmers to tow them. But the reputation lingered. A knight's greatest strength could become his fatal flaw. Blacksmiths reimagined armor, adding articulated joints and reducing weight. Chroniclers mocked the drowned knights as fools of iron, but their deaths spurred innovation. By the Renaissance, armor was sleeker, practical for both combat and survival. Yet the legacy endured. Folk tales warned of water demons that lured knights into rivers, a metaphor for the unseen dangers of hubris. Today, historians study these drownings as lessons in the paradox of progress. The same tools that shield us can bind us. The drowning knights remind us that safety is a balance, not a guarantee. Their armor was a masterpiece of human craft, yet it couldn't outwit nature's laws. It's a mirror to our own struggles, how we armor ourselves against fear only to find new vulnerabilities. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Strength is not static, and sometimes the heaviest burdens are the ones we choose to carry. Imagine a founding father not drafting the Constitution, but distilling whiskey. After retiring from the presidency, George Washington became America's first whiskey mogul, transforming Mount Vernon into a bustling distillery. But here's the twist. He didn't invent American whiskey. He perfected it. This is the story of how a revolutionary leader traded politics for fermentation, and why his rye whiskey still flows today. It's on 1707. Fresh from the presidency, Washington sought to diversify his farm's income. His Scottish farm manager, James Anderson, proposed a distillery. Washington, ever the entrepreneur, agreed. By 1799, his operation housed 5 copper stills, producing 11,000 gallons of rye whiskey annually, making it one of the largest distilleries in America. Washington's whiskey wasn't just a drink. It was a political tool. He sold it to neighbors, politicians, and even used it to soothe tensions during the Whiskey Rebellion, a rebellion against federal taxes on spirits. The irony? Washington's distillery thrived under the very tax system he enforced. Recipes survive today, a blend of rye, corn, and malted barley, aged in oak barrels. His ledger notes, "A good spirit must be shared, not hoarded. a philosophy that clashed with his role as tax enforcer. Washington's distillery burned in 1814, but was resurrected in 2007 by historians. Today, Mount Vernon sells George Washington's rye whiskey using his original recipe. Yet, the myth persists. He didn't invent American whiskey. Pennsylvania farmers had distilled it for decades. His true legacy? Proving that post-presidential life could thrive in unexpected ways. A man who once commanded armies now commanded stills, blending pragmatism and paradox. His distillery mirrored the young nation, experimental, resourceful, and unafraid to profit from contradiction. Washington's whiskey venture teaches a quiet lesson. History's giants often have the hidden chapters. He fought for liberty, then taxed it. He retired from power, then brewed it. The paradox of his distillery, funded by federal taxes, yet rooted in rebellion, mirrors America's own contradictions. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Even the most rigid legacies are fermented with irony. And sometimes, the best way to understand a leader is through the bottom of a whiskey barrel. Imagine a Roman noble fresh from the baths, dipping his toothpick into a jar of urine, not for punishment, but for hygiene. For centuries, ancient Romans brushed their teeth with urine, a practice deemed both scientific and sacred. This is the story of how ammonia, harvested from public toilets, became the secret ingredient in Rome's pearly whites, and why an emperor taxed it like gold. Rome's obsession with cleanliness was legendary, but their toothpaste? Far less glamorous. They collected urine from public latrines, rich in ammonia, and mixed it with crushed herbs and eggshells. The ammonia acted as a bleaching agent, scrubbing stains from teeth, a discovery credited to physician Scribonius Largus, who wrote, "Urine, even from camels, whitens enamel." Emperor Nero, never one to miss a revenue stream, imposed a urine tax on public latrines. Pecunia non olet, money doesn't stink, he quipped, pocketing funds from this unlikely commodity. By the 2nd century CE, urine-based toothpaste was a staple, yet it wasn't without risks. Prolonged use eroded enamel, turning whitening into weakening. The irony? Romans prized dental beauty, but relied on a substance modern science now condemns. Their innovation was a dance between ingenuity and ignorance, a reminder that progress often wears strange disguises. By the Middle Ages, urine toothpaste faded as trade brought peppermint and mint-based pastes. Yet the ammonia secret lingered. Modern dentists cringe, but the Romans' logic was sound. Urine's ammonia does neutralize bacteria, a fact rediscovered in 18th century medicine. Nero's urine tax, however, left a legacy. It became a metaphor for rulers profiting from the mundane. A reminder that even the most grotesque ideas can be monetized, and that hygiene, like history, is written by the bold. Rome's urine toothpaste teaches us that necessity breeds strange solutions. They turned waste into wellness, disgust into dentistry. Yet it also asks, how many of our own norms will future generations find baffling? As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Progress isn't pretty, and sometimes the line between innovation and absurdity is as thin as a toothpick dipped in a jar of societal paradox. Imagine a man whose name became synonymous with death, only to escape its blade. Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotin, the advocate of a humane execution device, is often mythologized as its victim. But the truth is murkier. This is the story of how a reformer's legacy was hijacked by history, and why the myth of his ironic fate endures even as the facts whisper another tale. 89. Paris erupted with revolution. Dieter Guillotin, a reform-minded physician, proposed a new method of execution, a blade that fell swiftly, sparing victims the agony of slow death. His goal, equality in death, no more aristocratic swords or peasant axes. The guillotine, named after him against his wishes, became the revolution's symbol. But the myth claims Guillotin himself met the blade. Legend says he was executed in 7, a victim of the terror he inadvertently fueled. Yet history tells a different story. Guillotin died peacefully in 1814, his body intact. The irony lies in the rumor itself, a narrative spun by a public hungry for poetic justice. The myth's persistence, however, mirrors the guillotine's paradox. A tool meant to humanize death became a machine of mass execution. By 17, over 16,000 fell to its blade, including Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. The device outlived its creator, haunting France until 1907, its last victim unaware of the doctor's misunderstood legacy. The myth of Guillotin's execution endures as a cautionary fable, a reminder that inventions can escape their maker's intentions. The real tragedy? Antoine Louis, the surgeon who refined the design, did die incipient, but of natural causes, not by the guillotine. Historians speculate the myth arose to mock the revolution's contradictions. A device born from Enlightenment ideals became a tool of its chaos. Guillotin's family, ashamed of the association, petitioned to have his name removed from the machine. The request was denied, a final twist in a legacy steeped in irony. The guillotine myth teaches us that history craves symmetry. Even if it's fabricated, we want the inventor to fall to his creation, a tidy moral lesson. But reality resists such poetry. Guillotin's life reminds us that good intentions can be severed from outcomes, and that the stories we tell often eclipse the truth. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. The past is a tangle of fact and fiction, and sometimes the most enduring legends are those we invent to make sense of the blood we cannot wash away. Imagine a war sparked by a pig's appetite and resolved without a single human casualty. In 1859, the United States and Britain nearly clashed over a swine that wandered into the wrong garden. This is the tale of the Pig War, where diplomacy outshone bullets, and a porker became the unlikeliest diplomat in history. San Juan Island, nestled between Washington and Vancouver, was a disputed territory after the vague Oregon Treaty of 1846. American farmer Lyman Cutler found a British-owned pig rooting through his potato patch. Enraged, he shot the hog, sparking outrage among the British Hudson's Bay Company settlers. British authorities demanded arrest and compensation. American settlers refused, fearing British encroachment. Both sides sent troops. Ex-American soldiers faced 3 British warships. For months, cannons pointed across the strait, but cooler heads prevailed. General Winfield Scott brokered a truce. No arrests, no payments, just a shared laugh at the absurdity. The only casualty? The pig, whose bacon became a footnote in history. The standoff ended in joint occupation. British and American troops shared the island for 12 years, swapping whiskey and stories instead of bullets. By 1802, arbitration settled the border. San Juan became American, but the British commander's cottage still stands as a bed and breakfast. The Pig War became folklore, a symbol of peace in the face of farcical escalation. It's taught today as a lesson in diplomacy and a reminder that even pigs can rewrite maps. The Pig War teaches us that borders are drawn not just by treaties, but by quirks of fate. A single animal's hunger turned 2 nations' pride into a shared joke. Yet it also reveals something hopeful. Conflict doesn't require bloodshed. Sometimes the hardest battles end with a handshake and a side of bacon. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. The line between war and peace can pivot on something as small as a misplaced hoof. And sometimes the best victories are the ones that never fire a shot. Imagine a hydrogen bomb, 12 feet long and 3 times as powerful as Hiroshima's, slipping into the Atlantic Ocean and never resurfacing. In 1958, a U.S. Air Force Beefer bomber collided with a fighter jet midair, forcing the crew to jettison their nuclear payload off the coast of Savannah, Georgia. The bomb was never found. This is the story of a Cold War secret buried under waves, a mystery that still pulses with radiation, and a question that lingers. What else lies forgotten in the ocean's dark? February 5th, 1958, a routine training mission over the Atlantic turned catastrophic. A Beefetrool bomber carrying a Mark V hydrogen bomb collided with an F-86 fighter jet. The bomber's wing was torn, fuel leaking. The crew, fearing a nuclear detonation, dropped the bomb into the ocean near Wassaw Sound. The Air Force launched a frantic search. Ships, divers, sonar grids, they mapped the seafloor, dredged silt, and found nothing. The bomb, encased in a steel and concrete shell, had vanished. Declassified documents later revealed the military's quiet panic. We must assume it is irretrievably lost. The bomb's exact location remains unknown. Experts estimate it lies 15-20 feet deep under silt, its plutonium core still intact. Locals joke about Tybee Island's buried treasure. But the truth is darker, a sleeping weapon waiting. The Pentagon classified the incident, fearing Soviet exploitation. For decades, the public knew nothing. In 2001, a retired Air Force officer revealed the bomb's low-yield destruct mechanism, designed to prevent accidental detonation, had likely failed. The core, now corroded, poses a radioactive risk. Fishermen avoid the area. Environmentalists warn of leaks. The bomb's coordinates, still redacted, haunt maps like a ghost. A 20-teen salvage attempt ended in failure, the ocean claiming its secret. The incident became a metaphor for Cold War hubris. We built weapons so powerful we couldn't even keep track of them. The Tybee bomb is a mirror to human fallibility. We engineered a force capable of ending worlds, yet let it slip into the abyss. It's a relic of a time when fear outpaced caution, and the ocean became a vault for our mistakes. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. The unknown is not just in space or time, it's beneath the wastes, in the shadows of our own making. And sometimes the most dangerous things are the ones we lose and choose not to find. Imagine a conqueror of Europe, a man whose name struck fear into empires, pouring his heart onto paper in graphic detail. Napoleon Bonaparte's love letters to Josephine weren't just passionate, they were explicit. Battles raged outside his tent, but inside he wrote of desire so raw, modern historians blush to read it. This is the story of how a military genius turned pillow talk into art, and why his most revealing words survived the chaos of war. 1796. Napoleon, newly married to Josephine, was deployed to Italy. Separated from his beloved, he wrote daily, sometimes twice a day. His letters were unfiltered. "I kiss your heart, my naughty girl," he penned, or "I want to devour you with my eyes, my hands, my soul." He fixated on her body, lamenting her absence in vivid terms. "I curse the miles between us. I would give a year of conquest to lie with you tonight." Josephine, however, was less devoted. She dallied with officers while he campaigned. Yet Napoleon's letters grew more desperate, more revealing. He even described his fantasies in code, fearing interception. One letter, now infamous, reads, "I am consumed by a fire that only your caresses can extinguish." Historians debate whether this was poetic flair or genuine obsession, but the transparency is undeniable. The letters survived, tucked in Josephine's desk or intercepted by spies. After their divorce in 18, Napoleon's vulnerability became a spectacle. Critics mocked him. A man who commands armies writes like a lovesick poet. Yet the letters humanize him. They reveal a man who equated love with conquest, demanding loyalty yet exposing his fragility. Josephine kept every letter, even as she remarried. Today, they're displayed in museums, their ink smudged by time and passion. Napoleon's TMI confessions became a lesson in power's paradox. The more that he controlled Europe, the less he could control his heart. Napoleon's letters mirror our own contradictions. We armor ourselves in public, yet spill secrets in private. His raw words weren't just love notes. They were a rebellion against the stoicism his empire demanded. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Even the most guarded heart leave traces. And sometimes the most revealing truths are found not in battlefields, but in the margins of a general's diary. Imagine a village in ancient Greece where a redhead's death brought not grief, but terror. Locals whispered that fiery hair was a mark of the divine or the damned. After burial, these individuals were believed to rise as vracalakas, vampires with an insatiable hunger. This is the story of how red hair became a bridge between life and death. and why the Greeks feared copper curls more than the gods themselves. Ancient Greek texts, like those of Aristotle and Pliny, hinted at redheads' unnatural connection to the underworld. Their hair, resembling the crimson of blood and fire, was seen as a sign of chaos. When a redhead died, rituals were performed to tame their spirit. Nails driven into coffins, garlic placed in mouths, and bodies buried face down to confuse the soul's path. But the fear deepened. Folklore claimed redheads would claw from graves, their hair still aflame, to prey on the living. A 4th century BCE tomb inscription from Lesbos reads, "Beware the copper-haired one, she walks at night." Even in death, redheads were denied peace, their bodies often cremated or exiled to remote burial grounds, a practice that lingered into Byzantine times. The belief faded as Christianity spread, but echoes remained. Medieval Europe linked red hair to witchcraft, while Victorian scholars romanticized the vampire redhead in Gothic novels. Today, geneticists note that red hair, caused by a mutation in the MC4 gene, was rare in ancient Greece, amplifying superstition. Modern Greece still whispers of Vrykalakas, but the redhead stigma lingers elsewhere. In pop culture, red-headed vampires haunt films and books, a myth spun from ancient fears of the other, the unexplained, and the fiery-haired. The redhead vampire myth is a mirror to humanity's fear of difference. What we cannot understand, we often demonize, yet it also reveals something tender. The Greeks saw beauty in chaos. Red hair, a genetic quirk, became a symbol of life's wildness, feared, yet secretly admired. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Even myths have roots, and sometimes the things we dread most are just reflections of our own unresolved mysteries. Imagine a storm cloud splitting open, not with rain, but with frogs. In 1873, Kansas City residents watched in awe as thousands of amphibians rained from the sky, pelting streets and gardens. Eyewitnesses swore it was a biblical plague. Scientists scrambled for answers. This is the story of a meteorological marvel that blurred the line between myth and reality, and left a city wondering if the heavens had a sense of humor. May 1810. A violent storm swept across Kansas City, but when the clouds cleared, something stranger fell. Frogs, thousands of them, leaping, croaking, and carpeting rooftops. The Kansas City Times reported they pelted like hail, fully alive and bewildered. Children scooped them into buckets. Adults debated omens. The scientific explanation? A waterspout had scooped a pond into the sky, carrying frogs aloft before dropping them miles away. But in 1873, such theories felt inadequate. Preachers cited Exodus. Skeptics speculated about animal electricity. A local naturalist wrote, "Nature's chaos defies our tidy laws. Even the sky can become an aquarium." For days, the frogs lingered, hopping through saloons, disrupting carriages, and sparking bets at the racetrack. The event became national news, with papers dubbing it the Great Frog Shower, a blend of mockery and wonder. The frogs vanished as quickly as they arrived, migrating to nearby streams or becoming dinner for local wildlife. But their legacy endured. Folklore linked the rain to curses, divine jokes, or even frog angels. Scientists, however, saw a lesson. The event confirmed that tornadoes and waterspouts could transport living creatures, a phenomenon later recorded with fish, snakes, and even a single cow in 1950. Yet, no explanation could erase the surreal poetry of the moment. A city baptized not by water, but by life. The Kansas City frog rain mirrors humanity's dance between awe and analysis. We crave meaning in the inexplicable, even if it's just a storm's whimsy. The frogs, oblivious to their fame, remind us that nature writes its own rules, often in a language we can't yet read. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. The world is stranger than we allow, and sometimes the most ordinary storms carry the wildest secrets. Imagine an Olympic Games where the sport wasn't about speed or strength, but slaughter. In 1900, Paris hosted the Olympics alongside the World's Fair and included a live pigeon shoot. Competitors aimed at 300 real birds, their feathers scattering like confetti. This is the story of the most controversial event in Olympic history, and how a spectacle of bloodshed became a catalyst for change. Paris, 1900. The Olympics were overshadowed by the World's Fair, but one event stood out for all the wrong reasons. Pigeon shooting, a sport imported from Belgium, required athletes to fire at live pigeons released from traps. Each bird was a target, each kill a point. Over 300 pigeons were slaughtered, their bodies piling up as the crowd cheered. Belgian shooter Leon London won gold, killing 21 pigeons in a single day. But the applause was drowned by outrage. Animal rights activists condemned the event, while newspapers described feathers drenched in blood and the pitiful squawking of the doomed. The Olympics, meant to celebrate human excellence, had become a theater of cruelty. Even the organizers seemed conflicted. The event was never repeated, but its inclusion reflected the era's casual brutality, a time when sport and survival were blurred. The backlash was immediate. Critics called it a barbaric relic, and the International Olympic Committee quietly retired the event. By 1908, clay pigeons replaced live birds, a shift toward ethical competition. Yet the 1900 Games remain a paradox. They introduced iconic events like archery and cricket, but also normalized cruelty. Today, the pigeon shoot is a footnote, a stain on the Olympic ideal. Historians cite it as a turning point, the moment the Games began reckoning with their own humanity. The pigeon shoot teaches us that progress is messy. The Olympics, born to honor the glory of the human spirit, once celebrated the destruction of life. It's a mirror to our evolving ethics. What we once cheered, we now condemn. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Even institutions built on ideals can stumble into darkness. And sometimes the most sporting moments are the ones that force us to ask, at what cost? Imagine a snowflake so large it could cradle a child's palm. In 1887, a Montana rancher peered out at his window and witnessed the impossible. A single snowflake, 15 inches wide, drifting from the sky like a celestial lace doily. This is the story of nature's most delicate giant, a frozen wonder that defied physics and left humanity questioning the limits of its own eyes. January 28, 1887, Fort Keogh, Montana. Rancher Matt Coleman braved a blizzard to tend his cattle, only to find the storm had birthed a marvel. Drifting lazily, a snowflake the size of a dinner plate landed on his coat sleeve. It was as wide as a man's hat, he wrote, and so perfectly formed I half believed it a trick of the light. Scientists later theorized the flake was a cluster of smaller crystals, fused by freak conditions. Sub-zero temperatures, near zero wind in air. So still it allowed ice to bond into a fragile lattice. It wasn't a single crystal, but a conglomerate, a snowflake mosaic, a paradox of strength and delicacy. Yet no photograph survives. The flake melted as quickly as it fell, leaving only Coleman's testimony and the town's whispers of a winter miracle. Modern meteorologists debate the claim. Could a snowflake truly grow so large? Most agree clusters of flakes can merge in calm air, but 15 inches stretches belief. Skeptics cite measurement errors. Romantics cling to the tale. The snowflake became folklore, a symbol of winter's hidden grandeur. It inspired poets and scientists alike, a reminder that nature's marvels often vanish before we can pin them down. Today, the Guinness World Records list it as the largest snowflake ever observed, though the fine print reads unverified but widely cited. Coleman's snowflake asks a quiet question. What truths slip through our fingers because we lack the tools to capture them? It existed in a liminal space, too fragile for science, too vast for memory. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Beauty often lives in the unproven, the ephemeral. And sometimes, the most extraordinary things are gone before we can say, look. Imagine a stiff Victorian parlor where cats in tailored suits and lace gowns sip tea, ride bicycles, and stage parliamentary debates, all captured on postcards. In the 1870s, Britain's obsession with cats collided with the era's love of etiquette, spawning a surreal trend, photographs of felines dressed as judges, housewives, and even soldiers. This is the story of how Victorians turned pets into performers, and why these images still charm us today. The Victorian era was a time of contradictions, rigid morality, yet a fascination with the absurd. Enter photographer Harry Pointer, who pioneered the cat postcard craze. He posed dead or sedated cats in human scenarios, a cat reading a newspaper, a cat holding a teacup, or a tabby lecturing a classroom of mice. By the 1890s, the trend exploded. Postcards featured the cat's parliament, kitten wedding processions, and even feline temperance societies. Some were humorous, others eerily lifelike, with taxidermied cats propped in wigs and waistcoats. The public adored them, mailing these oddities as greetings or collecting them as curiosities. But why? Scholars suggest it was escapism, a rebellion against the era's austerity. Cats, free of human constraints, became avatars for societal satire. A cat in a judge's robe mocked the legal system. A cat in a corset poked fun at Victorian femininity. The felines were both dolls and mirrors, reflecting the absurdity of their owner's world. The trend faded with the rise of cinema and photography's shift to realism. Yet the postcards left a legacy. They inspired Edwardian toy makers to create dressed cat figurines and influenced surrealist art. Today, they're coveted by collectors, a window into the Victorian psyche's playful underbelly. Modern parallels? The internet's cat memes owe a debt to these postcards. The Victorians, it seems, were the first to weaponize feline whimsy, turning pets into protagonists of stories they could control, even as their own world spiraled into industrial chaos. Victorian cat postcards teach us that even the most buttoned-up societies need outlets for joy. They transformed cats into clowns, judges, and jesters, a silent rebellion against the era's rigidity. Yet, the practice also reveals a darker truth. Our urge to anthropomorphize often masks discomfort with the human condition. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Playfulness is a lifeline in times of tension, and sometimes the most revealing stories are told through the eyes of creatures who cannot judge us. Imagine a medieval healer's stall where the cure for an agony isn't a potion or prayer, but a dead mole. For centuries, Europeans swore that wearing the furry corpse of a mole, a creature linked to darkness and earth, could banish toothaches. This is the story of how superstition turned vermin into medicine, and why the line between remedy and ritual was as thin as a toothpick. Medieval Europe's medical texts brimmed with folk cures. One remedy, recorded in 13th century manuscripts, advised, bind a dried mole to the afflicted jaw and let its spirit absorb the pain. Moles, burrowers of the underworld, were thought to possess mystical ties to healing, a belief rooted in their secretive subterranean lives. Apothecaries sold moles preserved in salt or sewn into pouches. Patients pinned them to clothing, tucked them under pillows, or even wore them as amulets. The logic? If moles could navigate darkness, they could dig out decay. By the 1500s, the practice spread to England, where it was said Queen Elizabeth I's dentist recommended moles for her chronic toothaches, a royal endorsement for a rodent remedy. By the Enlightenment, science began dismantling these beliefs. Dentists like Pierre Fauchard mocked mole magic, advocating instead for tooth extraction and hygiene. Yet the myth lingered in rural villages where moles were still buried under hearthstones to ward off decay. Modern historians see the practice as a blend of animism and desperation. Toothaches were excruciating, and medieval medicine offered little relief. The mole, a humble creature, became a scapegoat, a way to externalize pain into something tangible, something that could be killed and controlled. The mole cure mirrors humanity's timeless dance with fear. We grasp at symbols, dead animals, charms, or even modern placebos to impose order on chaos. Yet beneath the absurdity lies empathy. Medieval healers like doctors today sought to soothe suffering, even if their tools were flawed. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Healing is as much about belief as biology. And sometimes, the strangest cures reveal the deepest hopes hidden in our bones. Imagine a Mongol horde charging across the steppe, not with arrows or siege towers, but with birds set ablaze, a living, screaming weapon. In the 13th century, Genghis Khan's warriors weaponized nature itself, harnessing fire and flight to terrify enemies. This is the story of how the Mongols turned the sky into a weapon and why their flaming birds still haunt the edges of history. During the siege of Bukhara in 1220, Mongol engineers devised a brutal tactic. They tied oil-soaked rags to captured birds, hawks, crows, even flamingos, and set them alight. The birds, frantic and burning, were released over enemy cities. Their feathers smoldered. Their flight paths became unpredictable trails of fire. The effect was psychological warfare. Horses bolted. Wooden roofs ignited. Citizens, believing the birds were fire spirits, fled in panic. Chroniclers describe the scene. The sky rained embers, and the earth trembled at the cries of the damned. Scholars debate the scale of this tactic. Some claim it was a rare, desperate ploy. Others argue it became a signature terror technique repeated across Eurasia. Either way, the Mongols' message was clear. No sanctuary exists, not even the heavens. The flaming birds left a legacy of fear. Survivors of Samarkand and Kiev spread tales of the winged hell, a myth that softened into folklore. By the 14th century, the tactic faded, replaced by gunpowder and cannons. Modern historians question the logistics. Could birds carry enough fire to matter, or was this a metaphor for the Mongols' speed and destructiveness? The truth, like the ashes, is scattered, yet the symbolism endures, a reminder that warfare thrives on ingenuity and terror. The Mongols' flaming birds teach us that war distorts nature. They weaponized life itself, turning creatures into chaos. Yet their tactics also reveal a universal truth. The most effective weapons aren't always physical, they're psychological. A single burning bird could unravel an entire city's courage. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. History's most feared conquerors understood that the mind is the first battlefield. And sometimes, the wildest innovations emerge not from strategy, but from the dark poetry of fear. Imagine a French village gripped by whispers. In 1726, a woman named Marie Renard stunned Europe with a claim so surreal it defied reason. She had given birth to rabbits, not one, not two, dozens. Physicians marveled, nobles sent gifts, and the public flocked to witness the miracle. But beneath the wonder lay a darker truth. This is the story of a hoax that preyed on grief, curiosity, and the fragile line between science and superstition. Marie Renard, a peasant woman with a history of tragic stillbirths, arrived at a Lyon hospital in 1776 claiming labor. Midwives delivered not a child, but a squirming rabbit. Doctors, baffled, summoned the famed surgeon Claude Nicolas Lenoir. Over weeks, Marie birthed two rabbits, each appearing fully formed, their fur still damp. The news spread like wildfire. Pamphlets hailed her as a living marvel. Theologians debated divine intervention. King Louis XV dispatched his physician, who declared it proof of God's whimsy. Yet skeptics emerged. A rival surgeon, René Leonec, noticed inconsistencies. The rabbits lacked umbilical cords, and Marie's labor coincided with deliveries of live animals from local farmers. Under interrogation, she confessed the rabbits were smuggled into her bed, a desperate act to reclaim attention after losing her children. Marie was branded a fraud, her miracle a scandal. Leonec's expose sparked debates about medical ethics. Why had so many experts believed the impossible? The era's obsession with wonders and the mystery of female biology clouded judgment. The hoax left lasting scars. Marie vanished into obscurity, while Lenoir's reputation crumbled. Yet the tale endured, a metaphor for humanity's hunger for miracles, even in the face of logic. It also became a cautionary lesson. The female body, then and now, is often a canvas for others' fantasies. Marie's rabbits remind us that wonder and deception are twins. We crave stories that defy explanation, yet those stories often hide pain. Her hoax wasn't just about fame. It was a cry for empathy in a world that ignored her grief. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. History's strangest moments are rarely just oddities. They're echoes of human longing, loneliness, and the lengths we'll go to be seen. Imagine a Tsar who collected teeth not as a dentist, but as a conqueror. Peter the Great, Russia's modernizing tyrant, personally yanked molars from nobles who crossed him, preserving them in jars as trophies. This is the story of how a ruler's obsession with control turned human pain into a macabre museum, and why his collection still chills the halls of history. Peter the Great, a Tsar who dragged Russia into the Enlightenment, had a darker hobby, dentistry, not for healing, but for humiliation. At banquets, he'd accuse a courtier of laziness or dissent, then seize their jaw with iron tongs. "A tooth for a lie," he'd growl, extracting molars as punishment. His collection grew, a cabinet of teeth, each labeled with the victim's name and crime. Nobles trembled, knowing their mouths could become his next exhibit. One envoy wrote, "He keeps them like relics, gleaming in vodka-filled jars. A reminder, the Tsar holds power over body and soul." Peter even turned it into performance art. At diplomatic meetings, he'd casually mention his cabinet of curiosity, forcing guests to admire his grisly haul. The teeth weren't just trophies, they were tools of psychological warfare, a literal display of who held the reins. After Peter's death, his heir, Catherine I, locked the collection away, a secret too grotesque for public eyes. By the 19th century, the jars were quietly moved to the Kremlin armory, where they remain today, tucked beside Fabergé eggs and imperial crowns. Historians debate the collection's purpose. Was it a genuine fascination with anatomy, a sadistic joke, or a metaphor for Peter's reforms? If I can rebuild a nation, I can rebuild a mouth. The teeth, yellowed and cracked, outlived their victims, becoming relics of a Tsar who saw bodies as clay and dissent as a cavity to be drilled. Peter's teeth teach us that power often seeks visceral symbols. A molar in a jar isn't just a tooth, it's a story of fear, control, and the human cost of progress. His cabinet mirrors modern leaders who weaponize vulnerability, turning personal pain into public spectacles. As you drift into sleep, let this tale linger. Even the most enlightened reforms can cast dark shadows. And sometimes the truest portraits of rulers aren't painted, but pulled from the jaws of those they ruled. From the tooth-filled cabinets of Russia to the eerie solitude of the lighthouse at the end of the world, history's quirks keep gnawing at our curiosity. But for now, let the scrape of dental tools guide you into rest. Good night.